9mm+P versus 45 ACP+P and subcompact handguns. And what I have today is our Hornady critical duty ammunition. Now I realized that Hornady critical duty is actually meant for full-size handguns, as where their critical defense is made for little subcompact pistols like this. But it's been my experience in the past that Hornady critical duty actually can do pretty well in a short barrel. I've actually seen some of their cartridges do better in short barrels than some ammo that's designed for short barrels. So I thought it might be interesting to come out today and test these through short barrels. So our 9mm+P is a 135 grain, is rated at 1070 feet per second. Our 45 ACP+P is a 220 grain, rated at 990 feet per second. So I'm going to use my 3.2 inch Taurus G2C to test the 9mm+P, and my 3.3 inch Smith & Wesson Shield 45 to test the 45 ACP+P. So I'm going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy I get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic gel test. So I'm going to go into plain 10% clear ballistics to see what the best potential of those cartridges are. You know, no fabric in the way that could potentially clog a hollow point or anything like that. And then I'm going to move on to doing more of a real world simulation. 4 layers of sweatshirt material on this first 3-inch piece that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and then another 1/4 inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. Clear ballistics is roughly a half representation of the density of flesh, so 3 inches and 16 inches is more like 1.5 inches and 8 inches in a real living target. So I like to try to keep these bullets within this first gel block. If they pass through the rib simulation and go 3 inches beyond that, that could indicate it could pass through an average size individual. Another note here, just because there's snow on the ground does not mean these gel blocks are cold. They are stored inside, so the temperature remains the same year round. And even so, if they weren't, these are synthetic blocks. Temperature pretty much doesn't really matter unless you were to get down to like 20 below or something like that, which this was not, they would never get that cold sitting out here. And they don't sit out here. So after our ballistics gel test, then I'm going to shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up we have our 9mm+P 135 grain, rated at 1070 feet per second, likely through a 4-inch barrel. Let's see how close we get to that 1070 in this 3.2 inch barrel here. So 9mm+P. 1014, 1010, 1006, 1011, 1035. So relatively consistent velocity. I don't have any problem with that. That looks pretty good. Our 45 ACP+P 220 grain, rated at 990 feet per second, probably through a 5-inch barrel, and this is only a 3.3 inch barrel. But let's see how close we get to that 990 feet per second. $925, $919, $904, $863, $924. So there was one that was pretty low, and surprisingly the recoil isn't that brutal in this pistol. I was thinking with that round, it is a very powerful round, it's going to be hard to shoot. Not so much. I mean, there's a little bit of muzzle flip, but it's not uncontrollable. So let's start ballistics gel block and see how these compare. All right, we'll do our plain clear ballistics shot. No fabric in the way that could potentially clog a hollow point. No rib simulation that could slow down its potential for penetration. So let's see what we get here with our 9mm+P in the plain clear ballistics. All right. I'll set that with our 45 ACP+P. Let's go take a look. Oh, wow, that's interesting. That bullet really jumped back. Let me hit it one more time. One more 45, because that one looked kind of weird what it did. So 45 ACP again. Now let's go take a look. All right, so yeah, it kind of did the same thing that both times there. So a little bit of expansion, not great expansion, but you know, that's probably just due to the velocity in the short barrel. So bottom shot with our 9mm, our tops ones with our 45. Decent energy dump for what they are. So our 9mm+P, we went right to about 18.5 inches. We had some moderate expansion, and the 45s have some moderate expansion too. The first one went to about 23.25, and our second 45 went to about 22 inches. So a little bit of over penetration, but you know, there's just not a whole lot of expansion going on with those. So let's put it on our fabric, put in our rib simulation, and see how these do in our real world simulation. All right, our real world simulation: 4 layers of sweatshirt material, followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4 inch MDF at the back. If I can keep these bullets, you know, within the back rib simulation, I consider that an immediate success. If it goes like 3 inches beyond that back rib simulation, then I'm going to question whether it would be too much penetration. So let's see if we get here with our 9mm. All right, let's hit that with our 45 ACP. Let's go take a look. All right, so yeah, definitely a little bit of difference performance there. Not great expansion with both of these, but both of them stayed within that back rib simulation there, so that's good. Our 45 did hit it, but it didn't even hit it hard enough to really dent it or anything. So I'm going to say these are both totally fine for firing subcompact pistols. What's interesting is there's not a lot of expansion yet. We have okay energy dump in this first 3-inch piece, which means you see more than just a straight little poke line. You actually see some damage going on. A bit more with the 45 than the 9mm, and a bit more damage in there with the 45 than the 9mm. With the 9mm, the nose just expanded a little bit. With the 45, it kind of, part of the bullet expanded, so it probably yawed a little bit while it was going through there. But our 9mm+P, we went to 16.5 inches. And then with our 45, we went right to that rib simulation of 19 inches. So honestly, not that bad a performance overall. I've seen a lot better stuff out of short barrels, but to be honest here, I've seen a lot of worse performance out of short barrels with a lot of ammo. I've seen even several rounds that are designed for short barrels to do terrible, especially out of this 45. So honestly, this isn't bad performing overall when we look at a real world simulation, both those doing good damage and stopping before it goes through that back rib simulation. So not terrible overall. So let's pull these out of block. I'll take a close-up look at these bullets. Then we'll shoot our steel and see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, so I'm going to take a close-up look at these bullets, but here's our rib simulation, our 9mm hole, and our 45 ACP. So it appears they didn't really expand much right away. Now here's the bullets going through our plain gel. Here's our 9mm, here's our 45. So very consistent in our plain gel shot. Here's our 9mm. And we had some pretty good expansion overall. It doesn't look too bad. And the 45s, here's our first 45. And from what I could tell, it didn't expand at all, but it does look like it expanded the way they're supposed to. It just doesn't peel back quite as big as what it would from a longer barrel. And our second shot did pretty much exactly the same thing. So at least that confirms that they're going to kind of do the same thing every shot. So that's good. Now looking at the ones through our real world simulation, not so good. There's our 9mm. So that's a weird looking expansion. Tried to expand, but just couldn't quite expand. And our 45 did almost exactly the same thing. It's just it is a bigger bullet, so it's going to do a little bit more damage than something small doing that same thing. So honestly, not too bad though, just because it did impart that damage where we wanted it to go. It didn't over penetrate, in my opinion. So it would be relatively effective. It's not the best ammo out there for a short barrel, but not too bad. So that's a close look at those bullets. All right, 14 yards from the target, just my practical shootability drill. So let's see how fast I can land these on target with the 9mm. All right, just getting a front sight picture and popping them off as fast as I think I can hit the target. They shoot pretty good overall. I like how they're shooting. They just have a nice predictable feel to them, which is not always a hallmark of a lot of 9mm, but being 135 grain, they kind of feel really good in a subcompact pistol. So 45 ACP, let's see how this does. All right, so you see there I have to slow down just a little bit to get those shots back on target. There's a good amount of recoil, but it's certainly not what I would consider uncomfortable necessarily. It's a lot of muzzle jump, but it is nowhere near like a 357 Magnum. So it just feels really good in the hand, to be honest. And you feel like you're working with a lot of power. You feel a lot of confidence when you touch off one of these rounds. Let me back it up to 40 yards and see how these do from a little more distance. All right, 40 yards from the target, our Dick and Drill distance. Let's see how these things will do from 40 yards, actually 40 yards here. So I'm back up another yard from there, 41, 42. Let's see how our 9mm+P does. So those were shooting so good that I decided to speed it up a little bit, and that's when we started seeing some missing on my part. So very predictable. I really like that. Out of this little short barrel, that feels really good. It's a very predictable ammo. So our 45 ACP+P. See how this does from that 40 yards. So I saw my sights pull to the right on that miss. One thing I can say though is the 45 is hitting that target a lot harder than the 9mm. You know, that particular 9mm, you know, it's kind of like a 38 special for what it does when it hits that steel. It's pretty good. But the 45 hits it really hard. So 45 is just a really good round overall. So looking at this would not be my first choice for short barrels, but I thought it would be interesting to see if it would actually perform okay. And I'm going to say I think it performs really well because, you know, what it might lack in really big expansion that you might get out of specific short barreled ammo, it's making up for in power, especially with the 45, and it's making up for in consistency. We saw a much tighter spread of velocity than what we normally see because they make this ammo basically for law enforcement. So the consistency seems to be a little bit better than like critical defense or anything like that. Another thing is they put sealants on the primers or on the bullets. You don't see that with like some ammo like critical defense, but you see it with critical duty. So we have a very consistent load that's very reliable, and it's, you know, also consistent for its accuracy, and it's pretty consistent for what it's doing in terms of ballistics overall. So it's not great performing the way a short barrel load would be, but I honestly think it's great performing because of its consistency. It's not bad overall, in my opinion, of a short barrel. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.